Hey Reddit lovers! There is a golden rule in business: never fire the person who holds the keys to the castle. Today on ProRevenge, a know-it-all manager fires his lead IT architect to save a few pennies and ends up accidentally deleting the entire company. This is malicious compliance at its finest, where a satisfying paper trail destroys a massive ego. So, let's get into the story. New VP fires me to cut costs and accidentally deletes the company's legal archives, then tries to sue me for fixing it, so I countersued for everything. Here is the background. About 4 years ago, I was working as the senior systems architect for a mid-sized but extremely prestigious law firm. We specialized in high-stakes corporate litigation, which means we handled lawsuits worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My job was managing what we called the Vault. The Vault was a custom-built, highly encrypted server system where we stored all the discovery documents and evidence and sensitive client communications. I built this system from scratch myself. It was my baby. Because the data was so sensitive, the security protocols were paranoid-level tight. It relied on a complex series of automated scripts to back up data and renew security certificates. But here is the most important part. The system had a fail-safe mechanism called deep freeze. If a specific rotating encryption key wasn't manually updated by an administrator every 30 days, the system would assume it had been compromised. It would then lock itself down completely, making all the data inaccessible to prevent theft. It was designed to be unbreakable without that maintenance. For 5 years, everything ran perfectly. I rotated the keys every month and the partners were happy. Then the founding partners retired and the firm was bought out by a larger conglomerate. That is, when Chad arrived. Chad was the new vice president of operations. He was 28 years old and had an MBA from a university I had never heard of, and he wore suits that cost more than my car. His entire mandate was to cut costs to boost the quarterly profits so he could get a bonus. In his second week, Chad called me into his office and he didn't even offer me a seat. He was looking at a spreadsheet and he said, "OP, I am looking at your department's budget and it is ridiculous. Why are we paying for these expensive on-site servers and your high salary when we could just use the cloud?" I tried to explain to him that we couldn't just use generic cloud storage because we held classified legal documents and we had strict compliance laws. I told him that the Vault was custom built for a reason and that the automation scripts required manual oversight or the system would lock up. Chad just waved his hand dismissively and said, "Technology is technology. You IT guys always overcomplicate things to justify your paychecks. I have a friend who runs a cloud service, and we can migrate everything there for 10% of what we pay you." He told me he had already signed the contract with the new vendor and that I had 2 weeks to hand over the passwords and train them before my employment was terminated. I was absolutely stunned. I told him I couldn't train someone in 2 weeks on a system that took 5 years to build, especially since the new vendor wasn't certified for this type of data security. He just snapped at me and said, "Just do it, or you are out of here today." I knew fighting him was useless because his mind was made up. So I decided to do exactly what he asked. I documented absolutely everything. I sent a detailed email to Chad, and I made sure to blind carbon copy my personal email and the company's general counsel. The email stated clearly that per his instruction, I was handing over administrative access. I explicitly warned him that the deep freeze protocol required a manual key rotation every 30 days. I wrote in bold letters that if this was not done, the data would become inaccessible and potentially lost forever. I stated that the new vendor must be trained on this specific protocol and that I was not responsible for any data loss after my departure. Chad replied with 2 words: "Noted, proceed." I handed over the passwords to the new vendor. They were a couple of terrified-looking college kids who clearly had no idea what they were looking at. I showed them the manual and they just nodded and asked for the Wi-Fi password. On my last day, Chad smirked at me as I handed in my badge and said, "See, the place didn't burn down, enjoy unemployment." I didn't say a word. I just went home, cracked open a beer, and waited. I knew exactly how long it would take. 30 days. That was the timer. Exactly. 31 days after I left, I was sitting on my porch when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Then I got a text from a former colleague that said, "Pick up the phone, the office is metaphorically on fire." I finally answered, and it was Chad. But he didn't sound like the arrogant MBA genius anymore. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. He said, "OP, thank God we have a small glitch. The Vault isn't opening. The new guys can't access the evidence for the Peterson trial, and we have a court deadline in 48 hours. I played dumb and said, "Oh, that sounds tricky, but I don't work there anymore." "Chad, remember, you wanted to save costs." He started screaming and said, "Listen to me. This isn't a joke. If we don't produce those documents, we lose the case and the client will sue us for malpractice. Just tell me the password." I spoke very calmly. I told him I gave you the passwords. The system is in deep freeze because nobody rotated the encryption keys. The manual I gave you explains how to reverse it, but it is a delicate process, and if you type the wrong command, it wipes the decryption key forever. There was a long silence, and then Chad whispered. The new guys, they tried to force a reboot, and they typed some commands. I almost laughed out loud. I said, "Well then, you might have already corrupted the database. I can't help you over the phone." He begged me to come in and said they would pay me for the day. I paused and said, "Chad, I am an independent consultant now. My rate is significantly higher than my old salary." He asked how much, and I said $500 an hour with a minimum of 20 hours paid up front, and I need a consulting contract signed indemnifying me if the data is already gone. He cursed and hung up, but 10 minutes later he called back and said, "Legal drew up the contract, just come in." I walked into the office like I owned the place. The chaos was beautiful. Lawyers were screaming, interns were crying, and Chad was sweating through his expensive suit. I sat down at my old terminal. The new guys had indeed messed it up, but they hadn't triggered the final wipe yet. It took me about 14 hours of intense coding to bypass the lockout and restore the keys. During this time, the managing partner, who was the big boss, walked in. He looked at me and then at Chad and asked I thought you fired him to save money. Chad stammered and said we had a transition issue. I didn't even look up from the screen. I said actually, so Chad ignored my written warnings about the security protocols and hired an unqualified vendor. I'm currently charging you $500 an hour to fix his mistake so you don't get disbarred. The room went dead silent. The partner turned purple. I finished the job and restored the data 4 hours before their court deadline and handed them an invoice for $10,000. You would think it ended there, but it didn't. Chad tried to refuse payment. He claimed I sabotaged the system before I left to extort them. He actually tried to sue me for the $10,000 plus damages. It was a huge mistake. I had the emails, I had the documentation, and I had the signed consulting contract. I countersued for legal fees and breach of contract. During the discovery phase, my lawyer requested all communications regarding the IT transition. We found emails from Chad to the new vendor saying, "Ignore OP's manual, just make it work cheap." The judge not only dismissed their suit, but awarded me my fees, plus punitive damages for their frivolous lawsuit. But the real revenge happened at the firm. The Peterson case that I saved, they actually won it. But the client found out about the data breach risk and pulled their business. Other clients followed. The firm's reputation for security was shattered. The partner fired Chad publicly, and I heard he was escorted out by security. The firm eventually dissolved and was absorbed by a rival. Update. So I wanted to write a proper update for everyone because it has been about a year since the dust settled, and I recently met up for drinks with one of the paralegals who used to work at the old firm, and she spilled absolutely all the tea. It turns out that getting fired was actually the least of Chad's problems because the managing partner didn't just let him go, he went on a personal crusade to make sure Chad never worked in this city again. The partner apparently called every major recruiter and law firm in the state and told them exactly how Chad's negligence nearly cost them a $100 million lawsuit. So Chad has been essentially blacklisted from any management role and is apparently working as a shift supervisor at a key logistics warehouse now. But the juicy part is what the forensic accountants found after I left. When the firm started digging into why Chad hired that unqualified cloud vendor, they discovered that the vendor was actually a shell company registered to one of Chad's old college roommates. The plan was that they would charge the firm a low rate on paper, but Chad was receiving a 30% kickback of all the fees deposited directly into an offshore account. Because of this discovery, the firm's insurance company, which had to pay out millions in damages to the clients for the security breach, decided not to cover Chad personally. Instead, they filed a civil lawsuit against him for gross negligence and fraud to recover their losses. My friend told me that Chad has already had to sell his expensive sports car and his condo just to pay his legal defense fees, and he is likely going to be paying off that debt for the rest of his life. As for me, life has never been better. I took every penny from that settlement and combined it with the consulting fees to launch my own boutique cybersecurity agency. We specialize in disaster recovery for law firms, and ironically, 3 of the firm's old clients followed me here and are now paying me double what I used to make to keep their data safe. I hired 2 of the junior sysadmins who Chad had bullied, and we have a great office environment where the coffee is free. And the only rule we have written on the wall is that we absolutely never under any circumstances work with anyone named Chad. There are so many layers to this story. First of all, the absolute arrogance of firing the only person who understands a custom-built system is mind-blowing. It is like firing the pilot while the plane is in the air because you think the autopilot can land itself. But what I really love about this story is the paper trail. OP sent that email saying, "I am not responsible for data loss." That single email was worth its weight in gold. If you are ever in a situation where your boss tells you to do something stupid, you have to get it in writing and always BCC your personal email. I have a question for you guys in the comments. Was OP's rate of $500 an hour too high or too low? Honestly, if I were holding the keys to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, I think I would have asked for $1,000 an hour. Also, have you ever had a boss like Chad who tried to replace you with a cheaper option that ended up costing them a fortune? Let me know your stories down below because I read all of them. If you enjoyed seeing corporate greed get destroyed by IT competence, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Stay petty Reddit lovers, and I will see you in the next one.